protect the river and deepen the port harbor. It's not either or. I know later on President John Delaney will give an update on the announcement this afternoon, but I thought I'd make a few comments. I think what happened this week is a clear example of the power of public-private partnership. A partnership that's going to focus on working together as we seek state action to authorize and fund the breaching of the Rodman Dam. A partnership that will enable us to focus on increasing the flow of fresh water that will be a part of this overall plan to protect our river as we deepen the harbor. It also will help us solve long-standing concerns about the dam's environmental effects. The effects that everyone talks about that could occur without really focusing on what's at stake. We know that there are people who want to keep the dam, and we hope to work with them to address their concerns. This partnership will also seek more federal resources to promote the health of the St. Johns River. The river is one of our great natural treasures, not just for Florida, but also for our nation. And the river deserves national support. So, in closing, it's not every day that you see the business community, the environmental community rowing and really working together in the same direction, actually sitting and rowing in the same boat. Imagine that. But we can do that because we have great civic leaders, business leaders, nonprofit leaders who believe in working together to solve the most challenging, complex issues in our city. And so I think by working together to the Port Task Force, to all the citizens who are going to add their voice, just know that as mayor, I can continue to be the quarterback, continue to make sure we do our part as a city. The city's involved, and the beauty of it is we have all the stakeholders focusing on a shared mission, agreeing to the vision to really make this work. We know that there will be obstacles, but I see those as opportunities to continue to forge those relationships and those partnerships to better not only Florida, but to be a model for other communities around the country. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and congratulations. That's a wonderful accomplishment and a very unusual accomplishment. We appreciate what you've done. Any questions of the mayor? We're going to hear a lot about this from John Delaney later in more detail, but is there anything any of you all want to ask the mayor before we lose him? Thank you, sir. We appreciate you being here, Mr. Mayor.
Sir, thank you.
Okay, next on the agenda, first of all, let me ask you all what your time thing is, because I've got to leave at 4:45, and I know Hap's got to leave at 4:15. Are the rest of you all okay? Or
4:45 is fine with me.
4:45. Okay, so we'll ask our two main speakers if they could shave a little off their time, that would be great. Otherwise, Delaney will be talking to an empty hall, which he's probably used to anyway. The minutes of the last meeting are at your, are they, Becky, they've been circulated? Are there additions or deletions? Hearing none, can I have a motion?
So
Second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay. I want to talk a little bit about the RFP. Since our last meeting, I, along with the Office of Economic Development and Jacksport staff, met with Dr. Herbert Barber, who was one of the two bidders that we received. He's at the Savannah firm Zycon. We met with them, reviewed their qualifications, and found them to be acceptable. And we asked them to do a three-pronged analysis of the benefits or lack thereof of the harbor deepening. And specifically, and I'll read this because it's, I think the precise language is important. First, we asked them to review the economic impact model developed by Martin and Associates, including an evaluation of the validity of the methodology used in the Martin study. Second, we asked them to provide an independent evaluation of the business growth potential for Jacksport, given the port's current water depth and the 47 feet of depth under the proposed harbor deepening. In other words, on the one hand, it's this, on the other hand, it's that. And then provide a cost-benefit analysis coupled with the economic benefits of the harbor deepening. As you will recall, the Martin study said it was a 13-to-1 benefit to cost analysis. They've gone to work on this. Dr. Barber has reached out to Dr. Martin, and they've had two conversations at this point. One, some 2.5 hours, so I think they got into some pretty good detail. Dr. Barber says that Dr. Martin's been very, very cooperative. He has shared his methodology, his survey tools that he used as he went around to the various people in the port community to gather information. And while Dr. Martin didn't review any of the raw data from that survey, Dr. Barber felt like there was no question in his mind that the tools he was using, that his methodology was rigorous, it was valid, and more to come. But that was his first reaction after a conversation with Dr. Martin. He expects that he will have a draft to us in March, hopefully for our March meeting, and which we can, talk to him, query him, ask questions about it.
So it will appear before
He will appear before the committee, and then based on the outcomes of those conversations, he will put it in the final draft, and we can go from there. So, what I would say so far is so good. The next thing we need to think about is what's our agenda for the upcoming meetings. What are the things that you all would like to talk about? What do we do next? I think after today, we will have heard everybody that wants to talk about the economic benefits of the deepening. I think we have heard a great deal of the environmental issues. We will have an update on this settlement that the mayor referred to. And so at some point, then we've got to say, okay, we want to either vote for the harbor deepening or not. And if we choose to vote for it, then it would seem to me that the next step would be to go into the funding. If we choose to vote against it, it's been a great time. I enjoy being with you. So that's my thoughts. If y'all have any feelings different than that, and because one thought, I think we ought to get this consultant's report before we make that vote. And so we may have a February meeting scheduled that I don't know what we'll talk about.
That was going to be my question.
I'd like to wait and see what Dr., is it Baker's his name?
Barbara.
Barber, March meeting, because otherwise what we do at the February meeting. Is what, yeah.
So if I'm hearing you, we will cancel the February meeting, and Becky, if we told everybody when the March meeting?
It's the February 11th and then March 11th.
Okay, so February 11th is now a free day for you all, and March 11th will be an important day. So,
We vote by proxy and nothing present.
absolutely, you can go by
And, you know, because of the sunshine laws, we haven't had a chance to discuss this amongst ourselves together, so that would be something that I assume, I don't mean to sound stupid, but I assume we'll have the opportunity to do that.
I think we should. And I think that's, and we need to make sure that he will go through his draft, and, you know, maybe the April meeting is when we vote on it. Maybe that's better, and then we've got a final draft, and we've had time to think about it. I don't think it's fair for him to make a presentation of the draft and us vote on it at that point. So it's probably better thinking. Other thoughts?
I would have just said that, you know, I don't think we should do anything, obviously, until we hear his take on it. It might be good to spend the first 15, 20 minutes of that April meeting where we're going to deliberate, just kind of summing up what we think the facts are. I mean, I think that there's a lot of good deliberation that has to be had, but I mean, this has been
That's a
6
really
months.
good
I'm not
idea.
sure who the right person to collect and just say these were the relevant things, but I mean, you know, I know where I feel like I am, and I know where I've moved on certain things, but I wouldn't mind just a good summary. And I don't know who the right person is.
We'll figure that out.
Yeah.
We'll figure that out. And I think, to me, the right thing to do would be to get staff, the board staff, to try to put that together, and then have either Hap or I go through it in detail and consult our notes, and make sure we agree with their description of what we've learned, and then one of us will kind of walk through that. And I think it might be really good to have something ahead of time. Is that okay?
Yeah.
In the sunshine?
Well, I don't know, is it? Yes.
It is okay?
Sure.
All right, we'll try to, before we vote,
We just wouldn't be able to collaborate
It would be a
on
public document.
Yeah, we can.
on the document.
Right. We're just, one of us whoever gets the short straw, and I know it's me, because he's gonna say he's too busy. I can't say that. We will give something to you. And then and then you may very well say, I've gone through my notes, and you're wrong in that issue, and that's why we do it. Perfect. Okay. With that, if there's nothing else, Blake Ray is here. I see one of our legislators, and probably a port engineer, and a very knowledgeable guy in this area. And so thank you for coming, Blake. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and committee members, and thank you for your work. There's a box that's being passed out. I ask if you will not open that up for the moment. I will, there's already one that has. It's being passed around. I want to use that as a reference for you here in just a few minutes. I want to thank you first for the chance to come and to speak with you. I want to thank you for the work that you're doing for the city of Jacksonville. What you're doing is extraordinarily important, because you are bringing together the focus and the interest of the city of Jacksonville to help us make decisions that are positive and are good for our city. I've had the pleasure and opportunity to work with a number of you in different capacities in the past, and I'm looking forward to working with you and telling you a little bit about what's been happening in the legislature, how it relates to what we're looking at in terms of the deepening of the court, and in terms of what we can do with where we are from here. Before I go into my talk a little bit, I'd like to share with you a story. And I think when I get through with the story, it'll change your perspective a little bit. Some of you have heard me say this one before, but I think it's a very interesting and very perspective opportunity that we have as we move forward. And that was at the beginning of World War II. Of course, it began for the United States with Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor was attacked, and it was 2 days after the attack that Admiral Nimitz was asked to make an assessment of the attack and to make an assessment of the facilities following the event and to kind of see where we were. After he went around, he climbed up onto the docks and he looked and he made comments that were everyone in great anticipation were waiting for. And the comment was from him very surprising. It was, either the United States is the luckiest nation in the world or God is on our side. Now, I have a belief in that, and I'm not here to share my belief in that today, but I do share that with you because he went on to say that the reason that he felt that way was because if the Japanese had not been so focused on attacking the ships in the harbor, they would have sent one of the planes by over to the dry docks and prevented the United States Navy from being able to rebuild their vessels. If they had not been so focused on taking the ships out on that particular day, they would have waited one day and the vessels would have been out at sea instead of catching them when they were off on leave on a Sunday morning. They would have been in their vessels and their ships, and the ships would have been sunk unexpectedly. And instead of having 3,000 casualties, we would have lost 30,000. And if they had not been so focused on sinking the ships that were in the harbor, they would have sent a plane or two just a couple of miles away over a mountain that was there to where all of the petroleum reserves in the Pacific were, and would have destroyed them, thus rendering the United States incapable of resisting any force at the time. I share that with you today because as you're looking at things, as we're looking to the future of things, it's about perspective. Everyone looked and all they could see was the horror and the destruction that had happened as a result of the attack. Today, when we're looking, whether it's at the port or where we are in the mix of things, because you've seen and you've heard a number of people come to talk about a number of different opportunities or things that maybe are not even viewed as opportunities. The reality is what is it that we see? And what is it we care to view? And so that's why I shared that with you today, because what we see, what we view, where we are, and where we're going have a lot to do with those points of perspective. In the past, coming into the legislature, we were looking at things when I stepped in 2008, and we were at the beginning of what became a very deep recession, one of which we're still recovering from. At that time, we in the state of Florida were focused on three things driving our economy. It was tourism, development, and agriculture. Well, tourism and development fall off when you go into recessions, and agriculture is a mainstay of the state. But unfortunately, it doesn't do a lot for us here in the city of Jacksonville or in our metropolitan areas across the state. So therefore, our state was one of the ones that was hit one of the more severe than other states. The truth of the matter is that economies are built on three things. You make it, you mine it, or you grow it. And our state had been on a path that had actually begun a number of years ago, as early as the 1880s, for these various growth patterns that we had that were out there. The state, justifiably, was not very concerned about diversifying our economy. So in the process, we forgot to look at things that stabilize our economy, making it, mining it, and growing it. By the way, if you look at that, you'll see that that's the components of trade. the components of opportunity that we have for the state of Florida. If you look at that time, there were 14 ports that were in the state. When I was talking to people about ports, the problem that they said was there are 14 ports. They were looking at things the wrong way. There were 14 different opportunities to reach world markets, and they were all interconnected in the state of Florida. And the state of Florida was not looking at that. They were looking at where's the next growth pattern coming from and how they were going to fund budgets based on that, and not looking at things that were going to become sustainable for the future economy of the state of Florida. A trade flow study was conducted, some of which you may have read or heard about, and it said that, interesting enough, about 60% of the goods that we consume in the state of Florida are consumed, that we consume, come from ports outside of the state. Now, that's a striking number when you have 14 ports in the state of Florida, and that 60% of those goods are coming by. Now, I would suggest to tell you that there is something that's very interesting in noting that, and that's what is it you see in that number? And most of us will fail to see it. But that means that 60% of those goods that we're consuming come right by our window. They come down I-95, I-75, I-10, or down one of the rail systems, thereby providing this very interesting logistical keystone of which we are for the state of Florida. It's coming right into our window of opportunity. The question is what are we going to do about it? What is the state going to do? Now, we can talk about different studies, and we can talk about what the results of different studies are, and whether they're fully correct or partially correct, or how they're interpreted. But the reality is what that meant was there's a huge opportunity for the state of Florida to capture those goods and bring them into our state through our port system, and thus to develop what I would call a gateway port system. Now, you've probably heard what a gateway port is and why a gateway port is so important to us here in Jacksonville, because that's where we're going to bring goods in. We're going to consume a portion of those. We're going to add value to some of those, and then we're going to send the balance of those to other parts of the country. The real question is where are those going? And why are we consuming 60% of those of the goods from other ports? And the reality is that many of these goods are going either to Atlanta, Memphis, and or more interestingly, Chicago. They're making things, they're creating value, and they're adding, and then they're sending them to us. But they're not coming through our ports. So the question is how do we then look at and focus and bring all that together, and why is it meaningful when we talk about the deepening of the port? And that's because we put together in the state of Florida something that was called a freight mobility plan. If you haven't seen it, I suggest that you take a look at it because it's very meaningful. It was the first time in the state of Florida that we started looking at transportation not as just something that relates to congestion, but something that looks like an economic development opportunity. And using our road system, our rail system, and our port system combined to give us economic development opportunities. Contained in there are a series of different recommendations that are now being unfolded. There's legislation I'm working on in Tallahassee that is looking at how we can take those components, tie them together, and make sure that, if you will, that disconnected mile from our port system into our road system is completed so that we're able to make those links together. Because through that, if we think in terms of the state, and then we start thinking in terms of how that applies to the state of Florida, we start thinking and looking at these opportunities of the 14 ports connected into something to provide the needs for the state, because we have a population that will soon be approaching 20 million, and because we have 100 million visitors here every year. And so we will be utilizing our infrastructure, our natural infrastructure, in reaching and gathering and going for those markets. So the question will be is, how do we tie all this together and what does it mean? Well, last week, as everyone probably knows, the governor took his inaugural address, he gave his inaugural address, and he stated that, and he's already told me, and I know he's told members of the legislature, over the course of the next 4 years, he plans on spending $1 billion investment to our ports. Now, an interesting statistic is when I walked into the legislature, we were spending $8 million a year. In my second year, we had expended $25 million. In the first year that Governor Scott came in, we spent $100 million. We've now spent over $800 million to our ports, to our port system, and how to connect that together. So we've got a dedication now from the state. We've got this focus on the state. We're going to tie these pieces together using the freight mobility plan. And we're going to do that because there's these opportunities for Jacksonville, for whether you're in the port, operating specifically out of the port, or whether you're looking at other opportunities in terms of manufacturing, whether you're looking at opportunities in terms of logistics or trade or whatever other component will be. It's going to be right here in our window of opportunity. Now, if we look at that and we say, what are the components in the freight mobility plan? There were 4 that I put in there. And they're very important. That's first and foremost is the funding of the ports. The second is something that some people used to call an inland port. Well, we've said, no, it's not really an inland port. We've named those intermodal logistics centers, ILCs. We've dedicated funding to ports. We've dedicated funding to ILCs. And then to manufacturing. Because the fact is we're talking about trade. We're talking about broadening the economy of the state of Florida. And we need to do that utilizing the transportation system that we have. So it's about investing in manufacturing, taking down barriers that would slow us down and encouraging those to come in. We've implemented a number of those to encourage it. And the last thing was something, at that time when it was put in, people were missing, and that was natural gas. And how we would use natural gas. I don't need to tell anybody here, there's a huge focus now that Jacksonville, Jacksport has the opportunity to become a huge player in the natural gas and the LNG components as we go forward. So if you look at that, those are all the components. There's only one of those that's missing out of that, and it's because it doesn't fit in transportation. And that's the skilled workforce. And we're working on the skilled workforce. So now you have all of those components that will attract people in. People are coming back to the United States today in terms of their business. And the reason they're coming back is because we have the highest productive workforce in the world, by far. By far. People want our products. And why do they want our products? It's because they're dependable. So we stand behind them. We have high productivity, even though the cost of our labor may be more. If you look historically and just roll the clock back 20 years ago, the cost of a product was about 50% the cost of labor and 50% the cost of material and energy. Today, because of technology, that has dropped. The cost of a product is about 30% labor and about 70% materials and energy. So therefore, we have this huge opportunity to attract those back in. The question is going to be is why would you come back to the United States? That question is because the world wants our products. We stand behind them. And even though, of course, now I'm happy to say that the price of gasoline's down a little bit, I don't think anybody still likes the price of energy we have to pay for it, but it's still the cheapest energy in the world and will continue to be because of natural gas and because of the resources that we're discovering here in the United States. And so these companies are going to be coming back. And as we make our way towards that, where would they want to come to? They're going to want to come to a place that's going to be inviting them to come in, where they can do their businesses, where they can move their goods, where they can move their products. I suggest to tell you that if you were going to pick one place without looking anywhere else, if you took a map of the United States, you did not put anything on that map, and you said, here's the United States, and you put just simply population centers. You said, I can draw those lines on there later. Where would you draw that, and why would you draw that, and where would you pinpoint it? You would pinpoint Jacksonville. And the reason you would pinpoint that is because you probably have already heard, if you go somewhere on the order of about 1,500 miles north of us, you would get Cleveland, Ohio. That's how far west we are. And by the way, to tell you how far west we are, if you took the center of Jacksonville and you drew a line straight south, you would find that Orlando, the center of Orlando, is east of Jacksonville. Interesting, take a look at it, it's true. I share that with you because if you were going to just take a map and you put it up there and you said, where would you put a port to meet the needs based on the population base, you would pick Jacksonville, Florida. And then if you look at what we have in terms of the infrastructure, you would see that the road system supports that, the rail system supports that, it's coming right by our window. You do not normally have two interstates running north and south that are within 45 miles of each other, and they are here. So therefore, if we look at that and we look beyond that and we say, why the deepening of the channel? It stands for itself. It stands to reason because this is why and where you would locate all of your port activities. Now, there will be some of you that will say, well, we're too late in the game. Really? They may say Savannah. They may say Charleston. They may say something else. Savannah started on the process to deepen 20 years ago. Has any one of you in here in your businesses had a 20-year business model? The answer is, you may say you think you know what's going to be in 20 years, but you go after something and there's not one model that's out there that works 20 years from now, is it? And that's because everything's changing. The market is changing yet again today. And the fact is that we all want to be the lead dog and we have the opportunity. The opportunity is not single-handedly the port. The port is the keystone to it, but it's about all the components that add to it. It's about manufacturing. It's about logistics. It's about dedication from you as the local leaders. It's about what happens at the state. And it's about geographically where you are. And that's why we have this huge and amazing opportunity. That's why the state of Florida is dedicated to it. That's why I have been engaged in it. It wasn't going to be just about the Port of Jacksonville. It was about what happens around the state. And we're committed to that because we have 14 different windows on the world. And the best window on the world is sitting right out of our back door. And you have to capture that. You have to stay up with what those markets are going to be. And to be able to do that, we're going to have to be looking at the deepening of the channel. It's critical to us. Now, some of you may say, okay, so what happens if we don't get this? Do we lose that opportunity? The answer is absolutely not. We keep moving down the path because we never lose sight of what it's going to be. You have a road system that's going to be interconnecting. You have rail systems. Out in the Baldwin area, just north of Baldwin, something called the Diamond Cross that you may have heard about, where the two main line railroads cross. There's only 9 of those in the country. Only 9 of those, and one of those is in our backyard. These provide opportunities for sending rail to any location in the country or to receiving it. So when we start talking about things, we have the ideal opportunity for intermodal logistics where the freight can move into, you can add value to it, whether it's Cecil Commerce Center, whether it's the Crawford, the Diamond Cross, or whatever other component. There's a number of them that are around in our region. You can take all of those and piece every one of those together, and those are where you add value to it, you manufacture things, you make things, you assemble things, and you can distribute them. And we can distribute them to the state of Florida. We can distribute those to the eastern half of the United States. We can distribute them to the world. But in order to do so, we do have to stay up with what the markets of shipping are going to be. And therefore, we cannot stick our head in the dirt and expect that we're going to be able to compete if we don't go with where those market ships are going to be going. So it's essential to us, whether you're in manufacturing, so we look at wanting to grow manufacturing. Why do you want to grow manufacturing? For every job it creates, worth 3 jobs. We know the pay scale, as I'm sure you've heard before, the pay scale and what the impact is of somebody working hard for it. So it's about how we capture that future. So let me share with you one more thing. And that is, if the goods that are coming in, if we're thinking in terms of if you're Charleston or if you're Savannah or Norfolk or wherever, where are those goods going? They're going towards Chicago largely, a large portion of those for adding value, making something, and then sending it back to us. So what I think we've got to be thinking in terms of, as the big picture is something that I'm going to call move the market. You're moving things up there, they're going to somebody who I'm happy to tell you is probably freezing their tails off today. You know, it's a little chilly walking in, but you know, if I wanted to, I could still go out and play golf. You wouldn't want me to, because I'm not really a golfer. But you know, we could still go out and play around the golf, and we can do that pretty much 365 days out of the year. We have a friendly business environment. There's no income taxes. We reach out and we want to work with you to encourage people to come in. And so as we tie all these things together, then what we need to be doing is we need to take a look at something. We need to look at what happened in Philadelphia a number of years ago. Do you know where most of the fruit that you consume in the state of Florida comes from? Philadelphia. Do you know why? It's because Philadelphia put together a plan, and the plan is that they went down to South America and they said, you know, whether it's bananas, whether it's other types of fruit that you want to bring in, we can bring it to Philadelphia and you can distribute it out from there. And so the entire city of Philadelphia got together and they sold this plan, and here we are 100 years later, and we're still getting fruit from Philadelphia. Now we're beginning to make inroads into changing that. Why would goods come from the ports on the East Coast and be moved to Chicago or to Memphis? It's because 160 years ago we had a rail system that was there to support cattle and ultimately to support the industrial growth of the nation, but it wasn't dependent so much on the ports. Why are we doing that? We're following a 160-year-old path. People will begin to wake up and say, why am I doing that? Because it's costing me money to move goods into the East Coast ports, move them up there, and then to bring them back. So what we need to be doing is identifying, targeting specifically some of those companies, and let's jumpstart this. Bring one of those companies from Chicago, identify them, give the farm away, do everything we can to encourage them to come in. And then we do the second one. And then when you get to the third one, after that, you've then disrupted all the trade patterns that are going on up and down the East Coast. And suddenly somebody says, why are people going to Jacksonville? Because we're friendly, we want you, and we've got a great port. We have a great future. Move the market. We have that opportunity, but the first step is understanding what we have before us. So I ask you, as I started, what is it you see? What do you see? Before you, I placed a box. I'll let you open that up now.
$50, sweet as much.
I got
You see nothing. Because we want to contain ourselves in boxes. It's our nature. We want to be contained by boxes. But that's what your box looks like. It's nothing. It's flat. It's empty. What do we want? We have the opportunity to create something and not to be boxed in. We have the opportunity to create our future and to capture it. This is an opportunity that won't come by us again. It won't happen again in our lifetime. I'll leave you with one final thought. I sat on the city council. Of course, I sit over in the legislature right now. I don't believe that there's anybody that I can name that sat on the city council 100 years ago. If I can, it's only from a mayor. I might be able to identify a mayor. I can identify a handful of people from the legislature, But by and large, no one's going to know who I am 100 years from now. No one's likely to know who we are. But I guarantee you this. I guarantee you this. They will know the decisions that we make, and they'll live by them. We can't let a 100-year opportunity go by us. We've got to capture our future. The box is nothing. Our opportunities are. Thank you.
Thank you.
I stand open for questions. Any questions about the state, about freight mobility, about what we're doing, about legislation I'm working on this year related to ports? I'm happy to share all of those.
Blake, there's been some conversation that on this project that the state would pick up, that the federal government would pick up half and the state would pick up half of that. In other words, if it's 800, the feds pick up 400 and the state would pick up 200. Do you have any sense of whether that's true, A, and B, if there's a way we could get more than 200 from the state?
The answer is blended yes, that there is support and you will get support from the state. The funding from the state. I have a piece of legislation that I'm working on this year, and it may not be the vehicle that we get there with, but there will be an understanding of how we get there. And that blending of understanding, that blending of the process, it may not be a single bill, it may be a series of different things. There's a commitment from the DOT to certainly fund the state's portion. Now, I don't believe that it is reasonable for us to expect that the state's going to completely put the money in our pocket. There's going to have to be some skin in the game from us locally. But we can be assured that there's going to be a large amount of support of that from the state, so that the lion's share can be picked up by the state in concert with the federal government. I would tell you also that there's a mindset. I've had a number of conversations with other members of the legislature from around the state, and they are looking at possibilities of doing dredging as well. And our concerns are what happens a few months, a year from now, when we start looking at funding. If the federal government gets bogged down, I know that will be a surprise to you that the federal government will be bogged down on something. But suppose they get bogged down, we don't get another water bill, or we don't get another funding opportunity for a few years. And the reality is that even if we do, there's no guarantee that Jacksport will get into it, because it's no longer about, it's all about politics at that point in time. And by the way, the other things I've been talking about, it's not about politics. We've been trying to make a political argument. This is about making the compelling argument. The compelling argument is what we're doing with the state. The compelling argument is we're tying that together. And so the compelling argument that's coming from other members is there a possibility, is there a way in which the state can actually step up and fund those and not sit back and wait on the federal government? And by the way, I think that that's really where we need to be thinking, is why do we think we have to go beg for a few crumbs from the federal government when it's in our best interest to move forward and do it? And I think that that's what the thinking has become. So I believe you will see either a policy, perhaps some legislation. I may be the one to draft it, maybe out of a committee bill, that will actually look towards how would the state go in and fund, hopefully with the idea that we can get that reimbursed at some point in time from the federal government. But otherwise, we're all going to be sitting around going to the same trough, begging the same way, and looking at that. And hopefully, and by the way, the Port Authority has done a very good job of lobbying and working things in Washington. They're on top of it. But that possibility is still very real that we may not get funded. So how do we see how we can get funded in the closest next opportunity to get funding and get those funds coming in from the federal government? If not, what can we do at the state level? There's a lot of support there.
Other questions?
From your perspective, I'm sorry. From your perspective, timing-wise, how are we doing here? If we can come to a conclusion in April and make recommendations in April, timing-wise, are we okay in your mind, or
Are we referring to?
this task
The
force?
task force. You know, I think that timing is actually superb. If you come to a conclusion, you say yes, what you're sending a message to the state is that we're in. We're on board. And that we're going to scrap and scrape, and we're going to figure out how to put that, some portion from the local commitment, showing the local commitment. And by the way, there's a piece of legislation that I have been working on. It's kind of the continuation of the freight mobility plan that we put in 2 years ago. And that's for freight logistics zones. What it will be is getting priority funding from the DOT for anything that's connected to our port and connecting into intermodal logistics centers. And I believe that that needs to be a reach that's not just about Duval County, because every county around us is going to benefit from what happens. And that includes Nassau, St. John's, Putnam, little iffy on them. You know, they're a little sore with us at the moment over the Rodman Dam. But, you know, it's about a commitment from them. It's about Baker County. It's about Columbia County, because that's where the intersection of the interstates are and where some rail intersections are as well. And so it's about bringing that together and doing that. And then for us to reach forward and not move forward as just the city of Jacksonville, as just Duval County, but moving forward to where that if we're attracting somebody in, they may not come to Duval County, but we're all going to pull to help them come in, because ultimately it's going to be about those jobs that are going to create more opportunities, more utilization of our port, and therefore more funding, and change the dynamics, removing those barriers we have.
Blake, I thought your comment about the fact that when, if I understood you correctly, when you got in the legislature, the state of Florida was putting like $8 million a year into ports, and now we're looking at $800 million, which is, I think, very insightful. One of the things I've sort of come to the conclusion as we've been wrestling with this whole thing is that the state of Florida missed the boat in investing in particularly intermodal transportation years ago. The state of Georgia put their money into Savannah, and Savannah basically has out-competed us rather substantially. My understanding is that the state of Georgia has already said, the governor has already said in Georgia, that with or without federal funding, they will deepen Savannah. We don't hear anything like that from our state government. From your perspective, why did Florida ignore the ports for so long? Any thoughts?
Well, let me go back to an earlier statement first, and then I'll answer there. The reality is no, the state of Florida has invested with or without the federal government. When Governor Scott came into office, when he was a candidate, I went to him and I talked to him and I said, if you want to make a difference, let's make a difference in the economy, and that's ports. And he looked at it, he understood, I gave him the full credit for taking, understanding, and moving that ball forward. I shared with him two things. You want to make a change of two things in the state of Florida that will be game changers. There are two things at that point in time that could be game changers for our port. The first was the deepening of Miami Port. Sorry guys in Jacksonville, I didn't say Jacksport. The second thing, however, was Jacksport, and that was Mile Point. Mile Point was funded without federal dollars. Miami was funded without federal dollars. The state of Florida is in the game, and we will fund them. It's about making that commitment to be able to do that. I know that there are those I've talked to from Broward County, from Fort Everglades, from over in Tampa, and from Canaveral, where our current speaker and leadership is. And I can tell you, they are ready to invest in their ports, and they're ready to deepen, and they recognize the same thing that I share. Now, you asked the other part of that question is why wasn't the state engaged in it? And I'll tell you very, very simply why I believe that's true. And first and foremost is that there was never a necessity because the pump wasn't broken, but what we're trying to fix, for goodness sakes. The economy was booming and busting in the, in the early parts of 2000 to 2006, What are you trying to fix? And furthermore, when I was over there and people were telling me that you want to spend money on ports, for goodness sakes, there are 14 of them. What they were really trying to say is, how are we going to fund 14 ports? And again, they were looking at it the wrong way. They weren't looking at it in terms of trade. They weren't looking at it in terms of opportunity. And then the final thing is that each one of them were like their own fiefdoms. You've got those that are appointed board members, whether they're like here, we've got partial appointments from the governor, and partial appointments from the mayor. You've got others that are elected boards. You've got others that are partially elected, partially appointed. Some of those are county commissioners. Some of them serve in different capacities. So everybody's looking and was looking for their own piece of the puzzle. The problem that they had to begin with, interesting enough, when I was talking about ports over in Tallahassee, was they thought that I want to come steal the money, take it to Jacksonville, and do whatever we want to do. The reality is that it was about all the ports and bringing them all together. And now everybody's got that focus, and so the state understands that. But I suggest to tell you that, once again, 20-year plans aren't something that are always states keeping up with it. And therefore, Savannah, it is my firm belief in this. And this is going to surprise you, but they've got a system that they're trying to distribute things out of. Once Jacksonville fully enters the game, and we use the logistic keystone that we have, goods will flow from Savannah into our intersected area here for adding value, for making things, creating things, and shipping things out. It's a natural. It will necessarily happen. We're sending some things out of Jacksonville to be shipped out of Savannah right now. That road moves both ways. It's just about creating what that need is.
Quentin, I'm going to follow up on your question to Lake and as to why the difference before and now on the amount of spending. I think a big part of that difference is standing right there. I've known Lake a long time, but when he went into the legislature, there was no single statewide advocate for not just ports, but for intermodal approach to transportation to the degree that we're seeing it today. He single-handedly has brought not only the legislature, but even the professionals together to see the benefits of that. He's the freight mobility that he's talking about. He's led the DOT down that path, as well as the legislature and many leaders in the state. So I think we've got just a tremendous asset in Northeast Florida in Lake, and he's looked out not only for Northeast Florida, but for the entire state. I think it's tremendous, regardless of where we go as a task force, it's tremendous to have him as a resource in the state legislature for the next couple of years. So I think he deserves a lot of the credit.
I'll follow it. And Lake's heard me say, Lake's my hero on a bunch of different subjects, and I can tell you all kinds of stories on that, but I have become convinced, as I've looked at this question, that regardless of whether we deepen the port, we have got to invest in intermodal part of the ports. That my understanding is that Savannah beats us right now because they've got the ability to move containers off the ships onto the rail much more efficiently than we do, and that we've got to put some money into that. And so I think if we just deepen without doing everything else, Savannah will continue to beat us, but we've got to make sure it's a concerted effort to make sure that we take advantage of the deepened port.
And if those who are in the press will put their pen down for a moment, I'll tell you that the funding that I'm seeking in a separate bill that can use, some of those funds can be used for dredging, and I expect will be used for that rail connection across the north, because that is a key component of the success of Jacksport. It's key for a number of reasons, because it gives us the ability to take containers off of our port, get them onto onto a mainline rail, and actually you can connect that right over to the Crawford Diamond I was talking about earlier. And so the funding will be tucked. The opportunity for the funding is tucked underneath it. When you tie it onto the freight logistics zone, you have a magic combination.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you for
Very
your
good
time.
presentation. We appreciate you.
Keep your good work up. If I can ever be a resource or answer your questions, please don't hesitate to let me know. Thank you.
We will. Thank you. Mayor Delaney, President Delaney,
John.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alex told me that I was supposed to be short, and I noticed that you didn't ask either the mayor or Representative Ray to do that. And but I will be short. I'm really here in the capacity as chairman of the chamber, and also served as the chair of the Port Task Force with the Civic Council, which we suspended when the mayor created this task force and asked John and Hap to chair it. And in that light, I've sort of looked at the dredging of the port in terms of two pieces, two pass-fail tests. The first is whether or not the regulatory compliance can be established, and if you fail that, it doesn't go forward. The second is if there's a viable business plan, if the business plan makes sense. And not to prejudge, but under the assumption that those become yes, they may not, either one of those two may fail, and I know you're looking at the overall picture. The regulatory approvals could be delayed by lawsuit. And so some people have been involved with this, look to see, is there a way to maybe evade that, to push that aside so as not to slow down the development? Again, assuming both parts of those two tests were in the positive. And so the riverkeeper had expressed that it was likely to sue over the permitting of the port. And the idea of some very clever people were, well, can we find some way to marry this up so we can provide sufficient enough mitigation to the river to allow the environmental community to feel comfortable that there's been enough gain that whatever their determination of the downside is could be offset. And it was determined that really and this has long been an interest of many in the environmental community, is to breach the Rodman Dam, which was created back in the 1960s to establish a cross-Florida barge, be able to kind of have an Erie Canal or a Panama Canal through the middle of the state of Florida. And it was begun, a lot of money was raised, and ultimately determined that it wasn't a viable project, and so it was suspended. But the dam still created a pretty large reservoir, which is in effect a massive retention pond. And so the nutrients that have come down the Ocklawaha and the Silver River have sort of settled and gathered there. And a lot of that is now contributing to the pollution of the Silver Springs, which I think many of us have been to as kids or taken our family to. And the fish in the Silver River has dropped and diminished significantly. And so I actually was on the side that I didn't think that the Rodman Dam, just personally, should have been breached on the theory that it's created its own ecosystem. But it's clear to me now that the detriment to the river would be to continue to have that dam preserved. So the theory would be that over a 3-year period that reservoir would be slowly brought down to minimize the nutrient loading of the St. Johns River. And I think that many in the scientific community have ascertained that that's going to be a significant long-term benefit to the river. And so again, not to speak for the riverkeeper, I think she's going to speak in the public comment section. The determination there was made, well, maybe we can come to a handshake agreement on this. Both sides still have some rights reserved. But the hope would be that in the event that both those parts of the test are determined and that we're able to move forward for congressional or state funding for the breaching of the Rodman Reservoir, that there'd be a win-win, maybe not as much of a win as each side would want. That's really the nature of a healthy compromise. And I'll really sort of close out with this, to thank you for your time on this. I know that your personal time, it takes an awful lot of time to set aside. You're going to get popped from either side and all sides for it, but we appreciate your willingness to make this commitment. And so that, Mr. Baker, I hope I met. And Mr. Stein, you're short in time frame.
Beyond our wildest dreams.
Okay,
John.
I don't know, you was after there, next sign, yeah.
Yeah, I said it to the mayor, but I just think this is an extraordinary deal you guys have cut. And it, as we've sat here and listened to the environmental issues, as well as the economic issues, it's just unbelievable how this all began to bubble up and seem so logical. The Rodman Dam, I'm a bass fisherman. A comment you made at the meeting the other day is that the bass fishing, which was so wonderful when the Rodman Dam was first put in, is now very mediocre. And it's because that sediment has come in and what people are hailing as a new ecosystem really isn't an ecosystem at all. It's just a retainage pond. Mm-hmm. And this is I think, a win for the North Florida potentially in both regards. And I just really thank you for what you did and the leadership that you and the chamber put forward.
Well, again, I didn't have much to do with it. I do want to compliment Susie and Lisa also for trying to work through this, and they put an awful lot of time in it. And I think it's a winner. Again, may not work, but we're further ahead than where we would have otherwise been.
John, John Baker, Task Force, and thank you, John. Although it may be premature for this task force to opine on the agreement, but I do think it is worth this task force expressing our appreciation to the leadership that was taken, by the chamber, by the river keepers, and we ought to applaud those efforts in some form of a very positive resolution.
I would include the mayor as well.
And the mayor and everybody involved is extraordinary, and I think it laid the groundwork for something potentially that could be a strong win environmentally and economically for this community.
Well, and I think it's a template for the future. We can find ways to really do healthy trade-offs that each side is willing to be progressive on. Well, thanks again. I appreciate your efforts. Take care.
Thanks, John.
I'd love to make a motion that we endorse this as a really positive thing as a task force. I think that, no matter what decision we decide to make in April, the idea that, the mayor and business community and the environmental community can come together and find an accord is really important. And it's important to the work. I mean, we've sat through a lot of hours of meetings to learn, both sides of this, and I can say that this is, just wonderful.
Yeah, they provided an easier path forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, I second that.
Mark?
Mr. Chair, I have an odd situation in my case. I can't vote on a resolution because of the nature of my board. Putnam County sits on my board as well as Marion County, as well as the city of Jacksonville. So they're on all sides of it, so I won't be able to, and that doesn't reflect how I feel about the agreement at all. It's just, I'm in an odd situation.
We understand. I know that she doesn't want this, but I would add, as an addition to your motion, a great vote of appreciation to Susie Wiles.
Mr. Chairman, excuse me for interrupting. If I could just have time to address y'all before you take a vote, because I just want to make sure I say what I was going to say in public comment before you go to the resolution, to be fair.
You think they might not like you so much?
No. I just want clarification.
All right, you got 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Lisa Wright, I'm the St. John's River Keeper. And thank you for letting me just say a couple words, because I didn't want to say this after the vote had been inappropriate. But as you know, we've been working on this for more than 3 years, trying to get a balanced approach, working with the Army Corps of Engineers, working with Jacksport, and now working with this very unlikely partnership. I'm very proud, we are very proud to be part of it. Some of the nuances of the MOU, I just wanted to make sure we're clear so there weren't any surprises moving forward. As part of our concern about the Army Corps' work, as you know, we think it underestimates the environmental impacts of the dredging as well. Due to that fact, it's not mitigating properly. And so we are moving forward with a federal challenge of the Army Corps' work. Unfortunately, the timeline of that challenge will happen before this collaboration even has the opportunity to be successful. And so there will be a lawsuit filed more than likely within the next 60 to 90 days. Once that's filed, the timeline is 8 to 9 months before there's any action taken on that at the federal level. So that gives us plenty of opportunity to continue to collaborate with this local state solution where we have agreed to withdraw that federal legislation. So I just want to make sure that was clear. There were no surprises. It's well spelled out in the MOU. They have copies, for their copies are passed out to see what we've agreed to. In addition to that, we have maintained our right and obligation to challenge the permits if warranted. That's something our organization is built on, is making sure that we hold the permittees and the permitters accountable. So that's something we're engaging on. But it is something that we're excited about. We think we can solve this locally. That deals with a timing issue, but it's something that we have to make sure we have paths forward to protect the St. Johns River. And I'll answer any questions if you need further clarification.
Question?
I'd just like to make sure I understand that.
Yes.
So you're saying that you plan to withdraw that at if we bring this to a successful conclusion?
Yes, if the breaching of the Rodman Dam and the restoration of the Ocklawaha River and its forested floodplains, if that's funded and authorized, then we will withdraw the federal challenge of the Army Corps' environmental impact statement. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, we have a motion, do we have a second? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you. I know you look forward to drafting the motion. And you'll do a great job of articulating the sentiments of the group. That being said, we have nothing further to come before us other than the public comments. Do we have any other public comments? There are none?
Lisa was the only one.
Okay. Thank you all very much for being here. And thank you.
If I'd have known, I got rid of the public comment. I think I'm so too. I was interested, it came from China.
John, I know it's a, yes, yes, yes.